Good morning, everyone. It's
Good
Madeleine
morning.
McGee. Good morning, Mayor Riley. How are you?
Good morning, Madeline. I'm fine. Thanks for having me.
It is wonderful to have you with us. Guys, we are doing one of our removing our blinders calls. Many of you have probably been with us before, but I just want to share why we started these calls and what we hope you will gain from today's conversation with Mayor Riley. I think we all know that it is not easy to see what we don't wish to see, or to understand or even to address. It's very easy to look the other way. And that's when we don't question what's happening. And this is what many of us have done around the issues of racial inequities in our community. So we started this series of calls, Removing Our Blinders, back in the fall of 2020, so that we could help white leaders learn from primarily other white leaders who found ways to look beyond the world they know and to question and seek to listen and understand what's happening. And by understanding, to hopefully bring change to themselves and their work, and then to be able to tackle so many of the inequities that still exist in our world. This is a conversation I have long looked forward to having. Today, we will talk with Charleston's longest serving mayor, Mayor Riley. He was the mayor of my childhood and much of my adult life. When he walked into City Hall in 1975, he was 32 and I was 14. I lived around the corner from the City Hall, and my father was very involved in preservation. So perhaps more than most children, I got to watch and literally grow up watching as Mayor Riley revitalized Charleston and really worked to bring the Charleston community together. His passion when he ran and remains it today is advancing racial harmony and inclusion. So with that, welcome, Mayor Riley.
Thank you.
You're in your office on Broad Street?
Yes, indeed.
How many years have you had that office?
Well, 50 some.
The office away from the office.
That's right.
Yes, wonderful.
I first started practicing law before I was elected mayor.
Wow, that's some continuity. So as we discussed, I've got a few questions I'd love to ask you and see if that helps you share with our audience some things that might be helpful to them and their journeys. Values. So much of what we as leaders, how we become, are influenced by the values that we learn as children, whether it's from our parents, our families, and our communities. You were born in 1943, and the Charleston in which you grew up in was very different from the Charleston we have today. Will you tell us about that Charleston and the formative moments in your childhood or relationships that stand out for you as having caused you to really care about those that didn't look like you, that weren't part of your world? Because that's where it begins, to care about others, right?
Yeah, I'll try to quickly set the picture. And of course, Charleston in 1943 was rigidly segregated. I remember going to the department store with my mother and seeing the white-only water fountains. And of course, we went to the movie, there was a balcony for the African Americans to use, and many other examples of just rigid segregation that we just took for granted. We had two wonderful people that worked for my parents. Estelle Fickling was helped with keeping the house and cooking. My mother was a great cook. And then Ben Frazier, who worked for my father and also worked around the house. And, notwithstanding the rigid segregation, we get to know these people and love them. And Estelle, when she was in her advanced years and ill, asked me to come to her home, which I did. And she told me that she was dying and would we please come to her funeral. I told her, of course we would, but she's not going to die and all of that. But when she did, we were at her funeral. And I invited all of our family, and our youngest child, Bratton, was really probably too young to take to a funeral, but I wanted him to come. And he was uneasy, but later wrote a paper in class, what he got an A for. And then Ben Fraser lived in Wadmalaw Island, out in the rural parts of our community, and they didn't have a home. They didn't own any land. So my father, working with Fritz Holling before he was a senator, helped him clear title and build a home on Wadmalaw Island. And so we had relationships with people who were different from us, but the bonds of affection and respect that we had was overwhelming. And so that was part of our lives as well. And we didn't question racial segregation probably as much as we said, just because that's what existed. That's how we grew up. And it was later in life that we saw the gross unfairness of that system that we came to see as normal when we were growing up.
Those people that were moved between the two worlds, domestic servants that worked with white families and were part of the Black community. I think we as a community, a culture, a nation owe much homage and appreciation to them for the bonds that they built, because I do think there are many white leaders who had that as their only experience growing up, and that formed their appreciation, not their understanding of what the life was like for those that worked for them, but their appreciation for the care and that they gave. And when I first got to the Community Foundation, I can remember people saying the charity we do is individual to the individuals we know, and the situation that your father and clearing the title and helping Ben Fraser get land, that's the way much charity was done at that time.
Sorry,
Yeah.
AirPods
So,
were being weird. Anyways,
can we make sure that we're all muted, please, Alex? It sounds like someone's unmuted.
like printed.
There we go.
And my parents were active in the community and very generous. And so my father was working in every nonprofit in the community. My mother worked with the Association for the Blind. And so their life connected them with African Americans that they were brought to us. We understood what they were doing. And that was a very moving and important part of our life and our understanding of who they are, who they were, and what our responsibilities would be as well.
I think that is a good example of the role that our nonprofit and philanthropic communities can play in helping us to meet and understand the lives of those that we don't know as well, and to appreciate the challenges they face. So there's nothing I have enjoyed more in my life and appreciated than working with nonprofit sector and the exposure it's given to us.
And let me just say, and I don't know, but I think that's a great advancement of our country. The fact that we create and support a system of nonprofits. I tell people when I was running the city, and I was very part of all of that. But the nonprofit sector, the generosity, the idea, the interest that they had was so powerful, and in many ways more powerful than what I did as mayor. And so I saluted and welcomed and revered the participation with nonprofits.
And you were wonderful. There were many nonprofits that you worked with. And I want to get to that later in the conversations, because I think that government nonprofit partnership, it may not be as strong in many places today as it used to be. So, but let's talk about your coming of age during the civil rights movement, which, was sort of that 1954 to 68 period. You attended segregated schools all through college, right? You went to the Citadel. The first Black cadet didn't arrive until after you left in 1966. You went to USC Law. Was that integrated at the time, or was that still segregated?
It was segregated until I entered, and then the first African-American student in law school was in my class, Jasper Curitan, and we got to be good friends. And I'll never forget he was married, and they had a little boy who died, And I went to the funeral out in Eastover, South Carolina. It's just a very moving, heartbreaking experience.
How large was your class at USC Law?
Probably 140.
So it would have been very easy not to have gotten to know. Did you say his name was Haskell?
Yeah. Jasper.
Jasper, excuse me.
Jasper.
It would have been very easy not to gotten to know Jasper. What caused you to reach out and want to connect with him?
Well, I wanted to develop relationships with African Americans from our early childhood days, you know, and every school was segregated for the listeners here. It wasn't just in Charleston. Every school was segregated. But I desperately wanted to get to know those people that I didn't know. And so in law school, I was eager to get to know Jasper, and he very fine lawyer, by the way, and a great person.
Do you think we're just born with a curiosity for others that are different from us, or is that some trait that's acquired in some way?
Well, I think it varies. I think I was curious, and my parents did not discourage that. So I think, and my parents had not had a wide circle of friends. They had a wide circle of acquaintances, and so I picked up on that. And you know, my father worked, you know, on nonprofits, as I mentioned, and when he'd take me to a shop, and you know, a blue collar worker, sometimes an African American worker, but my father would engage with them, you know, in conversation. It's like a friendship was acquired or existed, and that made a great impression on me. To treat people kindly and be interested in them is very important.
When did you first see Blacks and other minorities treated as equals by your white family, colleagues, whatever?
Well, that's a good question. I think it was gradual. I think, again, that, you know, people that were within the family got to know, but I think it was, you know, I really think it was, and I'm jumping topics, but I think when I was elected mayor, that was my chief focus and my work. And I think that helped me and helped advance our community.
So let's quickly get there. But first, you were in the state legislature for 2 terms?
3 terms.
3 terms. 3 2-year terms, about 6
That's
years? Right. And what was the legislature like then? It was at large selection? Still?
It was at large, that's right. There were 11 seats in Charleston County, and you ran for that, and then if you win the top 11, you got elected, and I was in the top 11, but so it was not single member districts, and when I was elected, all members were white. There were no African American members, and
what year was that?
1968, and so the next year, Herbert Fielding and Jim Clavin ran for the State House, and we all raised money in a pool, and I gave all of my money quietly to Herbert Fielding and Jim Clavin, because I was getting elected, and I didn't need the TV, you know, and I might not come out on top, but I would win, and so Jim didn't win. He ended up working for Governor John West, which turned out to be great, because he ran an organization for the state, which was very important. But Herbert narrowly won, and so he was the first African American in the state legislature, and we work closely. You have rows of 2 in the state house. You have 2 people sitting together. I'm dancing in 2, And so I asked Herbert if he would join me, just to, because I wanted him there and wanted him to be comfortable. And that was a great experience. He was a wonderful man, and I think he helped open a lot of doors. We'd be cocktail parties after, every night, every summer. Andy would sponsor a cocktail party, and I would always invite Herbert to go with me, just to make it easy and comfortable. And he was a great guy to get to know. And
So was he perhaps your first professional colleague of color?
he was. Yes, he
Wow.
was.
And how long did you two work together? Your whole lives?
Yeah. He did. I'll tell you a story that might be out of sequence, but when I was elected mayor, and you might jump ahead. When I was elected mayor, my main focus, I was working on the downtown and housing and East King Street and all of that, but my main focus was advancing racial progress. That's why I ran for mayor. I never thought of being mayor. I wanted Charleston to be a place, a welcoming of African Americans and engaging, and they would be engaged and comfortable, and all of that. And so Herbert was, a colleague of mine all the while, and I was called behind my back by some people LBJ. And LBJ, of course, was Lyndon Baines Johnson for most, but the LBJ for some people meant Little Black Joe. And so that was, was called behind my back. And that didn't bother me, because I was pushing hard for racial progress. So for some people, that I was doing too much. It was always, somebody doing too much.
If you're not working hard, if you're not getting people criticizing what you're doing, you're not working hard enough.
You're not
Right?
working.
You're not pushing it. There'll always be people pushing. And
Yes.
change is hard for many people, particularly.
And,
So you came into the mayor's office in 1975, which was 6 years after the nurses' strike. And
That's
you
right.
lived through the civil rights movement while you were in the legislature, while you were going through growing up and all of that. What was it like to be in Charleston during the civil rights movement? What was our city doing relative to the rest of the country? That we know of the nurses' strike, but in many ways, that period in our city's history seems unusually quiet. If that's the right way to describe it, it may not be.
It was a quiet time. The nurses' strike disturbed the quietness, which was very good. And just remember, the nurses' strike at the Medical University was called by the African-American nurses who, believe it or not, were paid less than white nurses. Pure and simple. And which for all of us, this seems completely implausible. And so that why the strike was called, and I got to know the people engaged in the strike, and Mary Moultrie, and of course Bill Saunders, and all of that, and they were boycotting stores and a lot of stuff was going on. But that was a very important moment in our history. I think that was the first kind of really visible, robust action in terms of standing up for racial progress. And eventually the strike was settled, thank goodness, and the nurses' salaries were raised where they should have been all along, and worked together. And then I always jump ahead, but years later, Mary Moultrie finished that job and asked if she could come work for the city. So we got to work together in the recreation department. And that was one of the joys of my life, just because she was heroic as far as I was concerned, and to have her a colleague was a real source of pride.
What was the impact on the city overall of the nurses' strike? The world you grew up in, downtown Charleston. Did people see have a new appreciation, or did it just sort of happen and then life go on?
I think it was a little more of just let life go on. I think once the strike was settled, I think for some people, it just really didn't dawn on them what the issue was. And it took a while. But for me and others, it did dawn on us. And so it's just, the racial progress is slow. It was slow. It was slow in this part of the country. And it took a lot of, energy and controversy to disrupt that quietude and make real progress.
You spent 40 years in the mayor's office working on that. You did that step by step. We'll go through a lot of those steps. If you sitting where you sit today, do you think the pacing and the steps that you took were as fast and as effective as they could have been? Or if you were mayor, going back and doing it over again, would you have pushed for more agitation, more good trouble?
Maybe I'm not good at self-analysis, but I think it was the right, you had to lead the community and bring the community and together. And so I think it was I think we had the right pace, and because so on some of these issues you started from ground zero, and so you were working to explain and convince and reinforce whatever the issues were. And so I think it was the right pace.
I think that's one of the hardest things as leaders. You cannot get too far ahead of those that you want to help move. But so you have to go forward, then come back and bring them forward and work from behind. But you need to stay connected and encouraging, and it's finding the right pace and the right process is not easy. Because you have that longer term, bigger vision, and you want it to go quicker.
Well, you keep communicating, and what I always pictured was a family at home watching the television, and I was being interviewed, and I was talking to them about why whatever initiative we were working on, why it was important to them, and why the community would be better, and all of that. So it was you're always trying to encourage and to bring people along, and that happened, because people would tell me, later while I was mayor, that Joe, I now understand why you doing that, or what it never occurred to me. So you're pushing for change. You don't knock people in the head or yell at them or whatever. You bring them along, and you keep selling. People ask me what is the job of mayor, and I said one of them is sales. You just keep selling the citizens, bring them along, and do it in a manner that's respectful.
Absolutely. I think that's the job of all leaders, is to set a vision and sell it. We see that happening right now in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely. So, but two questions. I want to go back to your experience in the civil rights movement quickly, because I, just 2 decades younger, didn't really experience that. I did not read anything by Dr. King until I was 45. It's one of my great regrets. And I'm sure there are many people on this call who didn't really experience the civil rights movement. When we talked earlier, you told me about the impact that watching Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech had on you. Will you share what his work, Dr. King's work, being alive and, if not participating, watching what was happening on the national screen, how that influenced you? And what would you say to those of us that believe in the cause but weren't part of that experience? Are there things you say you absolutely must read, you absolutely must watch?
Well, you want to read and watch Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech. It was in August the 28th, 1963. And I had been in Washington that summer and coming back to the Citadel that fall. And my older sister was having her first child. So we were at the family house on the Isle of Palms, and, you know, everybody was on pins and needles. And I get up in the morning and they say, Suzanne's gone to the hospital. So we were just very nervous. And I turned on the TV and there was a march on Washington and Dr. King was speaking. I'd heard Dr. King, snippets of Dr. King's speaking in interviews, usually in a very controversial time. But I'd never had Dr. King speak to me. So I sat there with nothing else to do and listened to every word of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And that was so moving and impactful. He moved me forward substantially in the matters of racial progress. And so I, you know, he made a big impact on me, and I was determined. After that, I was still going back to law school, but I was determined that racial progress and civil rights progress was going to be an important cause of my life, and it has been.
And you know what else it did for you, I think? You saw the importance of the written and spoken word and the time and efforts you put into your speeches and when you have the opportunity to talk to people. You know, I have never seen you have a presentation that you did without putting deliberate thought into it, because you know that that's those words and that time to share with people is a way to change values and to inspire. And you know,
Thank you.
I will say, Dr. Matthews, I think, is on the call from the African American Museum, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I heard her recently speak, and she actually used poetry. And I thought, okay, we nonprofit leaders, we now need to include poetry in our speaking because that is so inspirational. But the ability to inspire others to see the vision you have, you've been great at that. And that's one of the things that I think we as leaders need to learn from. Anything that you would share about that first election? And, you know, I think learning to build trust with those that we want to work with for the first time. How did you go about doing that? Because that's the critical part of any partnership.
Well, any election, you really should reach out to as many people as you can and knock on doors and talk to people and explain what you're doing and why you're doing it and all of that, and most sincerely. And that election, I won overwhelmingly, and the African American community was solidly in my corner because they knew why I was running for mayor. And it was to advance their cause and to bring African Americans into the participation of our city government. And if it hadn't been that, I would have never run for mayor. So that was very important. I got to know the community because I knocked on doors and went into African American homes that I hadn't been in before, and we developed great friendship, and I was so committed to making sure that this city was a city for everyone, and the African American citizens came to believe that I was committed to that, and so it was successful, and then I quickly got working and bringing in people of color into the city government, and this is the picture I had. So you have a boardroom, and there are a lot of tables in the boardroom, and people familiar with going into the boardroom. And then you want to bring in another group of people. So what you do is you don't tell the people that are in the boardroom they got to go. You just bring in more chairs. Okay, we'll bring in more chairs. Now let me tell you all, we got some other people to come. You don't have to leave. Just take a seat. And so that's how we approach things in Charleston. So we wanted the people who had been at the virtual boardroom not to leave, we wanted them to stay and meet a new group of people who were their co-equals and work with them. And so I worked hard on affirmative action and brought people of color into the governance of the city in lots of different ways. I mean, municipal court and others. And one of my favorite stories is that we had a Keep City Beautiful effort, and it was largely in the downtown area. And so Carolyn Brown, an African-American woman, asked to come work for the city. And so I put her ahead of that group. And so this was an African-American woman dealing almost exclusively with white women in the community.
I think my mother was on that committee.
She was. And that was a beautiful thing to watch, because the white women became very close to and admiring of Carolyn Brown, and but it showed everybody that was a learning experience for everyone. And Carolyn is great, terrific, and and all of that, and so I brought in a lot of people of color. I didn't run anybody out. We had just kept the boardroom, just made the boardroom bigger, and then over time we had huge an increase of African American leaders in the city, and of course we all remember Chief Greenberg, when I sadly lost a wonderful chief of police suddenly, and so I searched the country over and found Chief Greenberg, African American, brilliant guy, and brought him here. And I never thought I would be able to get an African American police chief, but he was fabulous, and I knew that it was important. He was really strong on making the city safe and all of that, which was very, very important. But he also was someone knew that the white community could communicate with and be engaged with, and that was a real bonus for us.
And he took that role of outreach to the community, and he embraced it.
He embraced it. Go ahead.
So I was going to say, and he was so phenomenally professional and engaging and all those crazy, wonderful things that he was. You couldn't help but love him, and you couldn't help but see how good he was at his job. And I think so often we say we need to diversify, and we say we'll bring in one person or two people. But and I think your comment about, to bring someone to the table if someone else has to leave is a good one. We don't need to do that. The widening of our circle to bring others to the table and doing it in a meaningful, significant way, not just tokenism, is absolutely something we as a sector need to do, both on our staff and our boards. And we need to elevate leaders so that people see who have not had the opportunity to see.
Right. Yeah.
And that's probably what we as white leaders can most do to help, is to make room for our colleagues of color to lead in a way that only they can lead, because they are so phenomenal at helping us understand and tackle these issues. So I want to go through a couple of events that I think stand out for me about your tenure, but if there are others, mention them. 2000, you undertook to walk from Charleston to Columbia, hoping to bring attention, to lead by, visibility and PR and marketing. That's all that was a PR marketing stem. And I believe your friend David Rawl came up with it, and your feet probably never forgave him. But tell us about that experience. I had the fortune of walking with you on a day or two. I did not walk long enough to get my feet as sore as yours were, but that was an amazing, I don't want to say stunt, but that was an amazing event for that time. Did it work? Do you think it worked? And how did you come up with it? Give us the background.
I'll tell you how it happened. Every January, there'd be a big rally at the State House for getting rid of the flag, and then a day honoring Dr. King. wasn't, neither were getting anywhere. And so, so that early one morning, we had a group of people I invited together really to work on the issue of having a city holiday honoring Dr. King. And then I talked about the flag, and so it was a good group of people there. And I was a jogger, and I would go running in the morning and a couple of cups of coffee, and I was really dangerous. And when that was over, I decided that we weren't going to get the flag taken down unless we did something different. I mean, you have these rallies every January, and then people go back to work. So I came up with the idea of walking to
Oh my,
Columbia.
I thought David Rawl came up with it. You did?
I did, yeah. He did. He was enormously helpful, and so I advanced that to my staff and to David, and everybody thought it was good. Now, I didn't realize at that moment that I was actually saying that I would walk 110 miles because I didn't. But I realized, and David reminded me that I really had to do that. And but the purpose of this was that we weren't going to get the flag down unless we demonstrated that a cross section of South Carolinians wanted the Confederate flag off the state capitol. And so that took some selling. And so what I did is I invited prominent white leaders to join us in the march. We started at 2 o'clock on Sunday and got to Columbia at 12 o'clock Thursday, at noon on Thursday. And so I started calling. I called college presidents and football coaches and all those kind of people. And they all said yes. You know, there only one person said no, and he was, I won't even tell you, you wouldn't know, but they said they understood it. And so I said, just come walk a few miles. And so we organized it. And we had very prominent white people. Hugh McCall, the biggest banker in the world, was, walked with us, and many others. And so that got us on the TV. That's what I wanted. I wanted the TV to show that white people were walking along with me, with bringing the flag down. And so when we got to Columbia that Thursday, and my feet were a mess, but I got there. I got that Thursday, the General Assembly was meeting. And I'll never forget John Drummond, God rest his soul, senator from Greenwood, a Bentham type guy, came down as we were all assembled in front of the State House. I was getting ready to make my speech, and he came up close to me and he whispered, he said, "Joe, the Senate is taking up the resolution on the flag today." And so that got the community, that got the state going. The one mistake we made was that we got the flag came off of the state capitol, and that was very important. I'll tell you one story of an African-American woman who was one of the 3 people that walked the whole way, and Gail Smith. And
I know Gail well. She works at Greenville Habitat.
yeah, well, she came up to me as we were approaching the Capitol, and she worked at a 7-Eleven right down the street. And she said, "Mayor Riley," she pointed up at the flag, and she said, "You see what I have to see every day?" And I said, "Yes, you do." I said, "Well, you're not going to have to see it much longer." And so we got the flag down, and then and getting the flag down, that's what we were working for. We didn't take the next step of what to do with the flag when we take it down, and that caused a decade or so of unrest. We just had the foresight to say, okay, we got to do this with the flag. But that was very important moment for our state, and a great move forward, because to look up at the top of state capitol, see the Confederate battle flag is, It's not good.
No, it's not. And, but I think there's a, what are those issues, those symbols of inequities that you tackle and you say, this has got to go? And how do you build the momentum for it? And taking a bold PR visibility, visible action that, as you said, gave people an opportunity to show that they supported this in a somewhat easy way, walking a few miles. That's, it's all marketing, it's all communications. Let's move to what happened in 2015 with the Emanuel 9 shooting. And that was towards the end of your tenure. How did that experience impact you personally? And what do you think it says about where we are as a country? And then this is what I think would be, how do we reach the Dylan Roofs of our state? How do we aim to engage and reach them? Because he was clearly a lost soul that wasn't engaged in many of the things that we promote as a nonprofit in terms of community. And he found a world that where he could find himself, and it wasn't the world of never mind. Anyway, will you share your thoughts?
Well, I have to do this reasonably quickly because I'll take a long time. But the night I was at home, and it was 9:15, and chief of police called me and said, we've had a shooting at Mother Emanuel. And that's all I knew. I got in my car and headed up to the church, and then it became clear that it just wasn't a shooting, that a number of people were killed, and including Reverend Pinckney. The General Assembly was in session then, and I thought he was up in Columbia, and but he wasn't. He was at a Bible study, and killed. I guess two questions to get to Dylan Roof in just a minute. One is the story of how the community responded. And that was that assassination of those prayerful people in their church. Studying the Bible was beyond heartbreaking and shocking. But how the community responded is an important story. For the community responded not in violence or anger. The community responded by coming together and loving each other and helping each other. And that's what happened. You saw the next morning at the church, people bringing flowers, white people, black people, and then be there, tears streaming down their face, hugging each other, and so and then the commitment of moving forward from there was very important, and I think a special moment in our state's, in our country's history, how we responded to that. And then, of course, President Obama came a few days later and spoke at the church, and that was so moving. We all remember him singing Amazing Grace, which was so moving. But I think, as Jim Clyburn said, after that event, horrific event in Charleston, well, a lot of people around the country were waiting for the riots. That's normally what happened. You had the riots, and all of that. And Jim Clyburn said, in Charleston, not a pane of glass was broken. And you know, in my 40 years of work, we were always working to build a community of mutual respect and affection. And so I hope, I like to feel that we had created a community where everybody had a part. And, you know, in my work, I always knew never let an injured feeling linger or fester. You always respond, whatever it is, and every neighborhood and every person in the neighborhood was important, and you would respond, whatever the issue, with cleanliness or crime or jobs, all like that. And I feel that the community, I told people, it's like if something bad happens at your home and you're really angry, you don't start breaking your furniture. You don't do that. And I feel like the community, it was their community. It was their hearts were broken. But their response wasn't exhibition anger. Their response was love and comforting. And I really think that was Charleston's honest moment. And that's a tribute to the people of our community, the love and respect and decency that allowed Charleston to experience this most horrific event ever and respond in a loving, caring way.
And it's a tribute to the Black leaders of our community.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And when I think, I think much of what you did was to build the trust on an individual relationship and a trust with their government. But when you look at the history of our community and the roles we have played in advancing and promulgating the enslavement of others, and how far we went to protect that, I really wonder how and why our colleagues of color can care so much about this community. You know, it's a history I didn't know until taking the Race Equity Institute program at the YWCA as well as I should. But it just, their graciousness and willingness to look beyond that is phenomenal. Do you think we're gonna, what does racial equity mean to you? And do you think we are there or we'll get there?
Well, I'm the most optimistic person you've ever met. But
you have to be to do this work.
Yeah, I think we can get there. We just have to keep at it and don't let up. And what you're doing, Madeleine, and your team is doing, and what it's just wonderful. It's a long haul situation, but we have to keep at it and enforcing affection and respect and decency and honor. Don't let up.
Well, speaking of not letting up, you have said that the African American Museum is you think it's one of your most important bits of work amid all that you have done. Why is it that you feel that way?
Well, I feel that way because our nation doesn't know the story, doesn't know the history. It's whatever goes over our head or whatever. But the story we have to know and own the story. And the story is that human beings were captured, put in the horrific circumstances of the chains, the hulls of ships, and brought here to where the site where the museum is being constructed at Gadsden's Wharf, then unchained and sold to be bought by somebody to work at their plantation or whatever. And then the story of courage and persistence moving forward from that. And so
Dr. K told me that, Jeremy, that we can.
Sorry about that. Please, I think we got the person. Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, I think that the museum will tell that story in a powerful way for every citizen of our country, and certainly all who come here to know that story, to own that story, accept that story, and then move forward from that. Of course, the museum is going to have fabulous exhibits and robust stories to tell. And then the Center for Family History, which will allow African Americans who don't know their family history, where their people came from. Michelle Obama hired a genealogist that worked for us some years ago because she wanted to know about her family history, and it turns out that her paternal ancestor landed at Gadsden's Wharf and was sold to a plantation in Georgetown County, and that whole story of migration, and of course the story of the horrific circumstances of being enslaved, and then the thrilling story of the book, The Warmth of Other Suns, was a wonderful book about that. And I think that we'll give that opportunity at this museum and many other things.
You and I, like many people in our community, share a family history that includes people who fought in the Confederate War and perhaps worse. How do you acknowledge that ancestry and deal with that? I think that's something many of our white colleagues struggle with.
Well, I think, you lay it out, you get the truth out there, and that's what, you don't hide the truth. And I think that's, a recognition of that. And, those whose ancestors, own human beings, and, we got to get it out there. Don't hide it. And I think that's one of the great things. The museum will have that story in full, and which will be really enlightening for our country. I mean, the schools, kids, everybody on up. It's and the fact that the museum is at the site. We looked hard to find a place to build the museum, and it took me some years. And then luckily, we ended up being able to acquire the site, and that just makes it so powerful. I really don't think there's anything like it in the country.
Well, and you have recently announced that you are stepping down from your 24/7 fundraising role with that fundraiser extraordinaire that you are. What's next for you after that?
Well, we've raised all the money, and the building has been designed and it's under construction. I was head of the construction committee, but we worked all that out. So there wasn't anything left for me to do. And so the museum is going to happen, and it's going to be wonderful. So I teach at the Citadel, I do teaching at the College of Charleston, and some other things. And then I'm trying to write a memoir, which is easier said than done. But what I realized was that would never happen unless I had blocks of time to spend. So that's what I'm gaining now.
So let me invite anyone that wants to ask questions to enter them in the chat box. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. I also want to give a plug, Mayor Riley, if I can do it in the blurred, for the book that Brian Hicks wrote for you, which I had the chance to read in preparing for this. Again, with the blurred screen, I can't do it very well. And I'll send the link in the follow-up email, because I absolutely can't wait to hear what you say. But this is a wonderful look at your tenure on Broad Street and all that you made happen. And I would just close. I know that your work has been inspirational for me, but what parting words of inspiration or advice would you give to nonprofit leaders who believe this issue is important to tackle? And as they want it.
First of all, accept my commendation. I think, first of all, I think the nonprofit work in general is just a very high calling, and what is different in America. You know, de Tocqueville wrote about that 150, 200 years ago, and that's wonderful. A gift America has given, how people can freely give. They've got their own time, they've got their own money, and rather than be selfish, they give the time and the money to advance. And so I think, you know, that's, you know, a great cause. And I think what nonprofit leaders like you, Madeleine, and others on the call are doing is just the most wonderful work. You keep, and if I ever get around to the memoir, I'm going to write a little bit about a number of nonprofits that I've worked with, because as mayor, you don't run on any of these things, but you help them, you know, you facilitate, help raise money or do whatever. And I think that's just a special American story to tell. I've got lots of favorite nonprofits. I won't start the list now because I don't want big favorites, but it's really wonderful, and it's inspiring to see what freed people in our democracy do with their time and money and energy and intellect, and it's extraordinary.
I do think the nonprofit sector has a history of addressing through charity the results of systemic inequities. We
That's right.
feed people instead of asking why it is they can't afford to feed themselves. And this series of calls, we will transition in July to calls that we're going to call Removing Our Barriers, and try to identify where nonprofits are saying, okay, we need to move beyond treating the causes, the symptoms of this inequity, and tackling the systemic problems in the system. And that is a much different kind of work. It's much harder, and it's going to take a different approach. There are a couple of questions, I think. I see Kathy from Pickens had asked. She says, thank you for the wonderful example of empathy. I think empathy is probably one of the most important words we need to focus on. She asked, what would you suggest when working on, she says, an African-American project? Who should lead out? And I'm guessing she's asking whether white leaders or Black leaders. And that's oftentimes we see whites wanting to do for instead of allowing leaders to do for themselves. But what would be your thoughts on that question? She says that we're beginning this project.
Well, I think everybody is important, and people's generosity of spirit and encouragement is great. I think we welcome everybody, and certainly welcome and applaud African-American participation in any of the nonprofit work that goes on in our community. We're all one community, and so whatever color or experience we have, we give and help, and that's the spirit.
And building one state, building the network and strength and commitment to the entire state is a big part of what Together SC is about. And so thank you for sharing your story with leaders from across the state. I know there are probably a few that would love to say hi. So if you're willing to stay on, we'll say thank you to everyone who's been with us. And then we'll unmute the microphones if people would like to talk to you, if you're willing to stay a few moments.
Sure.
Okay. So thank you everyone for being here. Have a great day. And our next call will be in June. We have 2 leaders from Boeing coming to share what they've been working with in removing the blinders and addressing racial inequities at Boeing. So hope you'll join us for that. And thank you. Have a great day. Oh, great, Alex. Thanks for putting the link into the,
Great.
yeah, the next event. So, great. Mayor Riley, you may recall our mutual friend, Bob Deans, from the days when he covered you and you were starting 180 Place, that very first story he wrote. He happens to be in town and is on, and I knew he wanted to say hello, so I invited him to be part of the call.
Well, I saw his picture here. I didn't know he was actually in the Low Country, but Bob Dean is a great journalist who represented his paper all over the world, and a great guy, and nice enough to invite me to the White House Correspondents' Dinner a few years ago, which was a particular thrill.
Yeah.
Great to see you looking so well, Mr. Mayor, and
Thank you.
thoroughly enjoyed the insights today in this overview. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So do you remember that first night when you and Alan Houghton started 180 Place and Bob covered you on that first story? That first when you opened it up? I'm not sure what building you were in, but I know you all spent the night.
We were in the St. Julian Divine Center, and the floors, which was cement, are quite hard. But it was a great, I can remember that Alan Houghton was there and others, and you know, just to see what started. And that's again a great example of the nonprofit sector.
Well, Stacy Deneau, who's the executive director of 180 Place now, is on the phone. So I don't know, Stacy, if you want to say hi. You certainly have worked with the mayor a great deal.
I do. Mayor Riley, we just continue to work to do you proud. And we work to serve those who are most vulnerable in our community. And you set a standard. And gosh, in 1984, and we work hard. Our work has changed. The needs of those we're serving have changed. But the respect, the hospitality that we try every day, that has not changed. And you set that standard for us. And we just work hard to continue to make you proud.
Thank you, Stacy, and y'all just keep raising the bar. It's really it's really amazing if I write my book and I talk about nonprofits, rest assured y'all will be right in there.
Well, we may have to find a way for you to get to share those nonprofit stories, even if you don't put them in your book.
Right.
Because I remember we had you speak at one of our board leadership sessions, and there you've got lots of good nonprofit partnership stories. A lot of partnerships that were up and down, but a lot of great partnerships. So we'll do that. Okay, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Let me see. Am I missing anything? Can Mayor Riley tell us a bit more about the classes he's teaching at the College of Charleston? Well, are they open to the public, or are they for undergrads?
No, I do the serious direct teaching at the Citadel, and then I work with the Riley Center for Livable Communities on issues at times, but that's not open to the public. But it's been a thrill for me to be in the teaching environment. You obviously you can, as Chaucer said, you gladly teach and gladly learn, and I learn more than I teach.
I hope you're not having to grade papers. That's the hard part of teaching.
I've got some papers to look at when we finish today, but Carrie Taylor, my colleague, does the serious grading, and he's far more qualified to do that than me.
Yeah, it's good to have a partnership when you're teaching in that
Yes.
way. So, thank you, Mayor Riley. This is
Thank you.
so much.
You're terrific. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you for the leadership you have given our city. It's been great. And please thank Kelly for her help too. Everyone have a great day.